Welcome back to the Artie Lange Show. We're sitting here with Jim Berkenstadt, who wrote the book, The Beatle Who Vanished, about Jimmy Nicholl, who was a drummer for the Beatles on a world tour in 1964 when Ringo Starr got sick. Fascinating story. Is it you worked with Martin Scorsese as well?
Yeah, that's right. Well, not directly with him, but on his film, George Harrison, Living in the Material World.
Yeah.
I served as the historical consultant for the 3 years that project was going on.
Now, was it hands-on with Scorsese? What was that like?
Well, I basically worked a lot with the producer, Blair Foster, and the editor, David Tedeschi, who's edited a lot of his other documentaries.
Okay.
And so, they might be looking for certain pieces, like, can you find us some lost footage of George doing this? Or they might, another thing they'd do is fly me in and show me footage that they had.
Okay.
And say, what do you think of this? Is this old footage? Is it stale? We only want something new. And so they showed me a few in a row, and I said, yeah, seen that, seen that, seen that. And then all of a sudden they said, what about this one? They put this up on the monitor, and I said, I've never seen that. That means it's never been broadcast, and it was probably mislabeled in a can somewhere. And their jaws dropped and said, how did you know that? And I said, because I would have seen it.
You would have seen it.
Yeah.
You're that astute
I was
to
that
this.
big on, I know that much about the Beatles and their video and their audio and such. So that helped them. They said, oh, good, that'll be real fresh. Or they might say, we need a magazine about God is Dead from the late 60s, like a Newsweek or a Time. Can you get that for us?
Yeah.
So whatever it was, or can you put all a sequence, a chronology together of the concert for Bangladesh and everything that led up to it?
Right.
Whatever it was, I just did it.
Yeah, well, Scorsese's a huge, music fan, and the way he uses music in the movies, especially the Stones and the Beatles and stuff like that.
Right, and who can forget the Last Waltz, that great film he made with the band.
Documentary about the band's last concert. Well, now, how much of a music fan are you? I mean, do you still go see shows? And
oh, yeah. I like to go see new music as well as, the classic rock.
What new music do you like?
I just saw a band the other day called Real Estate that I thought was really pretty cool.
Wow, it's fascinating.
I'd call them a baby band. They're on their way up. So, things that come through town.
Right.
Oh, I really love, actually, the new #2, which is Danny Harrison's rock band, he's, of course, George Harrison's son.
Oh, he's out of L.A., right?
Yeah, he's out of L.A. now.
What's his band
I have
called?
a friend who played with him.
The new #2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're very cool. It's like chill rock. You kind of get into kind of a, I don't know, some kind of a, you go off somewhere when you listen to that music.
Do you think Ringo Starr's problem back then in '64 was he might have been the only Beatle that they wouldn't have canceled some shows for, right? I mean,
I think
maybe
that's
George Harrison. But he was probably the only guy, look, we can get on without him.
I think he's the only guy that they could get on without him, because you had John and Paul, who were the songwriters, who usually were singing lead, and George you had to have, because he's playing that lead guitar solo on every
but he
song.
was the best guitarist.
He was the best
musician in the band.
I think it would have been a big mess if any of the others had gone down. But because it was a drummer, and he only sang one song, they cut that song from the set list and said, well, we'll just find another guy. And they really tried to sort of present Jimmy in a very subtle way, so that most fans, like I interviewed fans who saw them in Australia.
Right.
And they said, we had no idea that Ringo wasn't there.
Which makes you insecure even more.
Yeah.
Any truth to the rumor, and studying the band, that Pete Best was fired because he was too good looking, because the chicks liked him better than they did John?
Is that true?
That's a rumor. That's a rumor I've heard.
There's a lot of
I've ever
theories
seen him.
On why Pete Best was fired, and they've all been thrown out there. I think in the end, George Martin in the studio commented to the Beatles and to their manager Epstein that he would have to bring in a professional drummer on the next session who could keep time with the music.
So it was musical talent.
So there was music issue. There was also an issue of the fact that personality-wise, Pete Best did not quite mesh with the other three as well as the other three meshed with Ringo, who they knew because he was in another band, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes.
Right.
And they had befriended him, and they also admired him from afar. And so they thought, well, if we have to substitute, let's try to get Ringo. We all like him.
Okay, yeah,
So
I guess
friendship, you're in boxes with everyone.
Right,
In
did you?
hotel rooms.
He did look different than the
Let me
others.
see what you got there.
I mean, he looks almost like a James Dean type in this
That's
one.
He was
true.
in this
the
picture.
chicks
He's the
all
moody
loved
guy,
him.
yeah.
The chicks
Yeah.
all loved him,
Right,
and that
yeah.
pissed off John Lennon, from what I heard.
And he's still a good-looking guy and a very nice guy.
I met him.
Yeah.
He actually came to see me do stand-up in Boston. He's got a family in Boston.
Oh, great.
And I did a gig there. It's about 7 years ago at a theater. And a guy comes backstage and goes, "Hey, manager of the theater I was playing," and said, "Pete Best is here." I said, "Pete Best? The drummer guy? Or the guy?" He goes, "The Beatles?" He goes, "Yeah, I'll bring him back." And he couldn't have been nicer. And then after
Yeah.
that, he was on the Howard Stern show as a guest.
Okay.
So he couldn't be a nicer guy.
Really nice
And he's
guy.
really sort of like, you
I've
know,
met him
when
too,
you
yeah.
when you talk to him, you go, "Was you aggravated about that? The fact that you missed out on the greatest band."
You know,
of all time?"
I've
Like, what are you gonna do,
chatted,
mate? You know.
I actually was at a 50th anniversary Beatle thing with Pete Best in Cancun in February.
Yeah.
I had a choice of New York or Cancun, and of course I made the right
Good
decision
move.
there. Yeah,
Especially the winters we've had.
but he's not. He's over that. You know, he's happy
It's a hard
with the
thing to
life
get
he's
over.
had.
It's
It
a hard
is.
thing. No, I know.
It is, but I mean, yeah, it's been what 50 plus years.
Yeah.
I think you get over things. you
Yeah,
know, and
well, I mean, it's
he's
simple.
got the right personality.
Right.
You know, for
When
the
I
whole
talked
thing.
to him, it sounded like he kind of got over it real quick. Like a couple weeks later, he seemed fine.
Well, no, I mean there was a lawsuit there
Yeah.
and such because he had signed on a contract with the rest of them. But I think that I think by probably the end of the '60s he was over it.
Was Jimmy Nicholl there long enough to where the delusional part was almost to the point where was he promised something maybe like, "Hey, listen, you could stick around with us"?
No, I mean Epstein made it clear when he first hired him. You know, this is what we're doing. Not only do we want you to sit in, but we're also choosing you because you're older, you're more mature, you've gone on tours. We don't want the media. This was Epstein's biggest deal. We don't want the media asking us 1,000 questions about is Jimmy Nicholl going to replace Ringo Starr?
Right.
So they made it clear to him, but yet I think he still started to feel like, hey, maybe I have a chance, and I'm really liking the way I'm being treated on this tour.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm sure it was.
You know,
it
the
was
best
great.
food, the best
Yeah.
girls, the best, party
ever.
favors.
What was the verdict on how he compared to Ringo musically? I mean,
Okay.
Ringo, pretty good drummer, but was he better?
You know, I think the styles are apples and oranges somewhat. You know, they both held the sticks the same way in sort of a power position. But in terms of style, Ringo was a rock and roll drummer only and played by feel. Jimmy Nicholl had been trained to read music.
Yeah.
He could play big
Session,
band
yeah.
drums, sessions. He could play ska, rhythm and blues,
Jazz.
all these things. So, but that doesn't necessarily make him better. It's just Ringo, I think, was a real team player as a drummer. He played to the song. Whereas I think Jimmy Nicholl wanted to be the flashy drummer that everybody noticed. So I noticed on some documentary footage I saw that after the song ended and the Beatles were taking the three of them were doing their famous bows.
Yeah.
Jimmy was still playing some kind of finishing drum roll
Right.
and cymbal crashes after the song had ended. Ringo never did that. When he ended when they did, and he bowed when they did.
Right.
But Jimmy was starting to like his position and reverting back to what, say, a big band drummer might do, to milk the applause. But the
Right.
Beatles didn't need milking.
No, not at that point.
There, you know.
especially. Yeah, Ringo really did. He seemed like a big kid back there. He was like always jumping around, like laughing and everything.
Seemed to be having a good time.
Yeah, not as mature maybe is what you're talking about, like you know.
Jimmy.
Yeah, just
Right. So different styles.
But talk about just really when you think about being thrown into that and out. I mean, 13 days is such a quick amount of time.
But it was 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, they usually would sleep for an hour or two, and then some band promoter would be banging on the door saying, "We got to get you on this airplane, or we have to get you to the next city."
Right.
So they were partying all night.
Did he talk about the women? Like,
A little bit. There were.
could he put a number on the amount in 13 days? That
Well,
he
it's like
banged?
they were each. Let's see, 5 times 4, it would be 20 women in a night,
There you
or 4 times 5.
Oh my God! So you're talking about maybe?
But
maybe
there was a lot of activity there. In fact,
you could have belted out 800 women in the 13 days. I mean, that's,
it was. They were busy.
an impressive number.
You know, they were young and they were busy,
Right.
and they weren't exactly. Well, John was the only married. Well, John and Jimmy Nicholl were both married.
and we
actually.
know from history that didn't mean much to them. I mean,
Well, yeah, right.
they were playing around, having some fun. But well, I don't know
They
about
were
Jimmy,
the
but
Beatles,
John.
you know. Yeah.
So the number that he put out there was five a night.
I'm just saying that from various sources, sometimes there were 5 girls per Beatle.
Per night.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it could
Occasionally,
happen.
you know,
Listen, you know,
not every night, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
you know,
they had a
Motley Crue's doing it. Why not the Beatles?
there was a quote from this reporter who sort of wormed his way into things, and he said that he was making love to this teenager or whatever, 18.
A reporter was?
A reporter
Right.
was. And then one of the handlers came into this room and said, "Does anyone want to meet John Lennon?" And he said, "Next thing you know, I was just doing push-ups in the bed because she was gone." That was his quote.
Well, listen, you
So-
gotta the people on the periphery of a band. They gotta know how to work it. If they know how to work it, they
guess.
could get a lot of
Yeah.
residuals too. Absolutely. They gotta these guys step on a landmine of vagina, and you get hit with some shrapnel. What are you gonna do? What now? What about? Do you ever consider writing any other books about any other bands?
Well, I've written a book called Nevermind Nirvana, which was the story behind the making of the album Nevermind in the
Okay.
90s.
Because Butch Vig is your
Butch
friend.
Vig's a friend of mine, and so that gave me access to, the band and records and things and
what
rare
was-
demos and such.
What was that like? When in doing that book, Kurt Cobain, were you able to explain him at all?
Boy, he was a real man of contradictions, and
I'll say.
he had a tough upbringing. From the age of 9, his parents divorced. That caused a lot of disharmony. His parents actually started to fight more after the divorce than they did during, and he had been really he'd had a real nice, happy upbringing till then. Then everything went south, and it really caused him to sort of disassociate and have a lot of issues. So, I don't know that we went into it in great detail,
That says a lot.
but
that says a lot.
because it was mainly about how did this album get made
Yeah.
versus a whole biography.
But that has,
Which is
the
good.
biography,
Yeah.
the biography of the people creating the album, especially him, the
Mm-hmm.
singer, songwriter, the everything of it.
For what-
His childhood and something like that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, we brought some of that into when we talk about his songwriting for that album. We brought in some of that.
It has everything to do with it.
He's
Yeah.
as a songwriter. I mean, the stuff that he would make was amazing because it was so almost childlike and sing-songy, but at the same time, it's hard to play and sing a lot of those songs. What
Yeah,
he was
sure.
doing, it's pretty complex. But
Like
it
what are you talking about in
sounds-
particular?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like a song like "All Apologies"
Right.
or
See, that
Lithium
seems
or
simple to
something
me.
like
I
that.
mean, the
It's
lyrics
really-
certainly aren't simple, but the music of it seems simple.
It's one thing to be just strumming chords and singing along, and kind of everything's going in junction with everything else.
Yeah.
But he's playing stuff that's syncopated with what he's singing. It's like off kilter a little bit. And that's, I think, part of what made them sound so great. Some of the genius of Kurt Cobain.
I think they are an amazing
Yeah,
band.
they are an amazing
Yeah,
band.
Yeah, the Beatles.
No doubt about it.
Of
Of the 90s, yeah.
Of the 90s of that type of music.
That's why we picked that album, because we felt that was like the Sgt. Pepper moment
Yeah.
Right.
of the 90s.
No, I agree
that
with you
album.
completely. Well, listen, Jim, thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks for having me
It is
on.
The Beatle Who
Yeah.
Vanished by Jim Berkenstadt.
It's like a great book.
It's about the Beatles drummer that not a lot of people know called Jimmy Nicholl, who played with them in '64. And we got a website. How do we find this?
Yes, well, Amazon.com, or if you want a signed copy at our author site, TheBeatleWhoVanished.com.
TheBeatleWhoVanished.com.
Yeah.
All right, Jim. Anything else you want to plug? Come back again, my man.
All right, thanks a lot.
Really
Appreciate
fascinating
it.
stuff.
The Artie Lange Show, weeknights on Audience, only on DirecTV.